So please make her feel welcome.
Thanks everyone for coming. Can everyone hear me? Awesome. So I'm going to be talking about how to identify a good, inclusive open source community from a bad one. So make sure you're on the right hook. I do live on the other side of the pond on the Western New Zealand island. And that's what it was on the email, so I love it. And I've been doing DevOpsing for the last 6-7 years. Before that, I was a Java developer. And I've been working volunteer for an open source project called OpenMIS as a DevOps work on leadership infrastructure. And if you want to know more about these communities and about this project, I did a talk last year on linux.conf.au, so you can check it out. What is it about? And when I submitted this talk, my main reason was that, hey, I do remember when I had just graduated, I actually heard a lot of bad things about some open source communities, how aggressive they were, how toxic they were. And while I actually was really interested in contributing, I didn't know what I should be looking for. And I did not want to go and find those dark spots by myself. And there are so many talks about how to give your first contributions and how to find the tickets and how to find the projects to contribute. And so many other talks about how to make your community more inclusive, but I didn't find anything in between those things. And while I was doing the research for this talk, I was looking for a lot of data. I was looking for resources and things, and I couldn't find. So I did the second bad thing that I could do is just ask semi-random people on the internet what they thought. And this talk is a lot of opinions from myself and for a lot of friends that I have. And while they are our opinions, if you disagree with one or two of those things, it's fine. You're totally entitled to have your wrong opinion as well if you want. But it's the kind of thing that I think you should be aware. This is the kind of thing as we've perceived, and this is an anecdotal evidence that we have, but that's all the best that we have for now. And I think it's quite interesting, when we talk about open source, we think a lot of things, but it actually, in my opinion, there are three things we call open source, and there are three distinctive things. So first is the product or library that you actually downloaded. So for example, you download Firefox and install on your machine. The code for this product or library is released on the open source library. And this product is released using the open source development process. It's the process that you have the core developers, that they are the main maintainers of this library or tool. And anyone, air quotes, on the internet can possibly create a pull request and ask for change or feature and everything else. The third thing that we think when we talk about open source is the community that got us around the product, around the development process. So it's a group of people that will be using the open source development process to create an open source product. Those three things are independent. Just because you have a product that's released under an open source library does not mean that it has an open source community behind it. And while there's a fair bit of open source that is actually created by companies and people being paid to do their day job on open source, there's a lot of people that actually volunteer their time to open source. And there are so many different reasons, and there is data actually about why people volunteer their spare time to open source. And I think it's particularly important to realize why you want to contribute, because that is going to make a difference of which one you're going to trust or not. And I have the feeling that when you arrive for the first time to GitHub or to GitLab or to Bitbucket, the whole thing is particularly overwhelming. So you have so many repositories available, they are all there, and it's really hard to know where do you start. What are the things that you actually find on GitHub available for you? So I do believe there are three types of code that is available on GitHub or Bitbucket or whatever, choose your poison. The first one is what we call source available. They are tools or libraries that someone inside a company decides to make the code available on GitHub. So for example, there is a developer at Facebook that manages to convince management to make this code available on GitHub. Still, everyone, the core developers are all from inside Facebook. The roadmap happens inside Facebook, on the meetings, on the internal week from Facebook. The code is available, but it's actually backed by these companies. And when I say company, I'm saying companies that do not have open source as their business model. So I'm not going to, it's not a code that is actually backed by Red Hat, God bless them, or HashiCorp. Because those companies actually have open source and open source communities on their business model. I'm talking about AWS or Facebook or things like that. What is interesting, I'm not saying do not contribute by a source available library at all. What I'm saying is that keep in mind that you don't really have context because most of your communication happens internally to the company. You are not going to be probably able to influence much the roadmap. Chances are, regardless of how much you can contribute in here, you'll be seen as an outsider. Chances are you're going to be seen as a guest, while you're a pretty nice guest that helps a lot. There are very few projects that actually pass these files from source available to actually become something bigger. And it's not personal, it's just the way they are. The second type, and I'm going to guess this is the majority of code that we have on GitHub based on the data that they have been releasing, is what I'm going to call one-person band. So you have this single developer that had to fix a certain thing, and they actually created this open source to solve the problem and actually made it that. And this is the only person they do on their spare time. They are probably not being paid at all to do that because that's what we've learned from the maintainers, all the conference that we have around that. And this is extremely common even for very popular libraries and tools. It's a lot more common than you think so, and that's you have a lot of examples from the Node and the Java ecosystem. It's very, very common, and you have to understand that you're talking about one single person, which means that if there is any problem, if the person has any single problem on their life, if they're part of a country that is under revolution, you actually have, the development is going to be taking a lot longer than that. And persons have their own problems and their own personal circumstances, and things can change. And if you're going to actually help and volunteer for one of those things, it's not really a community per se. You have to get along with this one or two people that maybe the project have. And of course, you're talking about there are very few resources. You just have probably one developer or two developers, and that's it. They don't have a lot of different skills. It's perceived, and it's not really true, but it's something to be aware, that if you have just one person that is, let's say, the dictator of that project, they might not handle conflict well compared to a committee and things like that. So that's something to keep aware how things are being, how that person is actually handling that. The third type, and this is the one that we actually think when we talk about open source, are the ones that actually have a community around. So you have a committee of core maintainers, sometimes you have conference or summit or something. You have multiple core developers and a lot of satellite developers that are creating pull requests and creating features. And you have usually multiple companies that might be contributing to this community. You're going to identify one of the really strong signs this is a community is that you have a code of conduct. So you have more than two people, so you actually have to establish some communication rules. And you have explicit communication channels. So you have forums, Slack, mailing lists, and things like that. When you have 2 people, you usually don't need that. And except for the source available one, both the one-person band and the communities, the good thing is that almost everything is public, so you can see every information that is already there, what happened on the past, and what are they doing, and how they handle conflict and everything. The first thing that you always have to access, to take a look, is the project dead? You can't be part of a tribe that is already dead. So the 4 things that you have to look are commits, issues. There are any recent commits? Are there any new issues that people are actually answering and actually closing? Do you have pull requests that were raised 3 years ago and no one actually took a look or declined it or put a comment or anything? If you have a mailing list, is there any message? If you put a message on Slack, is anyone going to come back to you in 1, 2, or 3 days? And then, if you establish that the process is not that, it's like those very same things you can use to discover how aggressive they are. Except for commits, because if people are swearing commits, it's fine. If you can take a look on issues, pull requests, and communication channels the very same way that you did to establish if it was dead or not. So I usually go for the kill. So I try to find a bad issue. Bad, I means that there was a user that didn't really know how to report things, how to establish the logs, didn't really know how to answer the question. It's not an aggressive user that came saying that everything was terrible. Someone that literally didn't know how to ask a good question. And take a look at how people answered and how what kind of answer they'd have. Note that no answer is different of saying being aggressive on your answer. No answer could just mean that they just didn't have the time, didn't have the priority to actually could answer that. It could be just a matter of lack of resources. Second thing is that pull requests, and specifically if there is any declined pull request, that is, in my opinion, a source of what could be bad is probably going to show up in there because people are asking for comments on review their code. So if there is a pull request, take a look on the comments. It doesn't matter if you know nothing of coding or programming. It doesn't matter. You have to look for the comments. And understand, please, that the maintainers do not have any obligation of merging a pull request. You don't really know the context why that was not merged, why that was not maintainable. So declining a pull request is not bad. It's always about how they handle gracefully the decline. And this was a sentence of one colleague, and I thought it was great, and you can take it for life. If there is a mailing list, is it a trash fire? Usually it's pretty easy to identify when something is a trash fire, and it's not hard to see, and I would highly recommend doing that. And a lot of times, and you have this, I think this is not swearing, there's a lot of bullshit that say, no, we are not aggressive, we are just straightforward, we are not emotional, we are just, you're taking things personally. First, when someone says that, I call it bullshit straight away. Someone says they're not emotional, that is the biggest lie that I can possibly have. But I've learned this trick, someone taught me, and I couldn't find that talk anymore, is that can you please rule? For anyone that can understand irony and sarcasm, this is the best rule that I've ever taught. So take this example, imagine this is on your pull request, change the indentation, follow our guidelines. Can you actually make a can you please and make it nice? Does it sound ironic? No. So it's good. This is straightforward. If it sounds ironic, this is not a good sign. This is actually being nasty. And this is an example from a certain project that I'm not going to name. You can, I suppose. You can't make this not ironic. You cannot rewrite this on any possible way, keeping the words and not making it ironic. So it's a trash file. You can access as, that's the technical term. this is the field that we actually could get some data on top of it. That is the presence of code of conduct and be enforced. So take a look on when the code of conduct was implemented. Take a look of how hard it is, how much backslash there was. Take a look on, there was a lot of comments of people saying that it was absolutely bullshit. Yeah, so that is the kind of thing that is quite nice. You're not going to find code of conduct if there is just one person there. So this is something that is particularly important to see on communities. And while we are accessing all those things, I'm going to show some things that I believe are +1 things. So you say, okay, this is a good thing. If it is there, it's a good thing. It doesn't mean that it's perfect, but it's, you can kind of count some points in here. I really think that communities where non-coding work is valued is a good community. By non-coding, I mean triaging issues, answering users, and writing documentation. That is something, it doesn't, sometimes the documentation is absolutely terrible. It doesn't matter. It's about being recognized. Say, thank you so much that you spent the time doing this documentation that was much needed. Second thing is that this is only applicable for product, not really for libraries, but I do believe that products that have different translations for the end users tend to be better communities than the others. I also think that when you already, a community is already a diverse group, it tends to be, it's a sign of a better community. And you have two ways of looking at that. So you take a look on the mailing list and see the name of people and see, you can guess the cultural background. Or if it's a big enough community that will be conferences and summits, you go for the photos. That is going to give you a really good hint on things. This is OpenMS conference 1 year ago. As you can see, it's a very fun group. And while you're accessing even the issues and everything, you're going to find a lot of grammar mistakes and typos. And you have to type stuff in here, both from people that speak English as a second language and native. And how do people behave on that? If it's okay and people just naturally behave and they actually just continue like life like normally, that is, in my opinion, a good sign. This came over and over again for pretty much almost everyone I asked it. If the product, if the community has a getting started documentation, or even the tag saying first issue or newbie or bootcamp or something like that, that tends to be a sign of someone that wants to onboard people and sometimes I'm going to admit the documentation is terrible and you cannot follow, the issues are impossible to start, but that's about the intention of the person that was there, not really if they actually did a great job. And this is a much smaller session about things that if you see, you should be aware and take a closer look. This is a pretty controversial one, but I'm still buying for it. I do believe that when a project is in a cool language, by cool, today I would say like Go, it tends to attract the kind of people that tend to be more toxic than other products. It does not mean that every Go project is a bad community, absolutely not. But take a look closely in that because it has this tendency. Cool projects, hype projects, and cool language tend to attract this kind of people. This is the only red slide that I have in here, and first because Pocahontas is awesome, and second is because this is, if you just have to take one thing home, is this slide. So I was told by one friend that jerks will be everywhere. There is always going to be a jerk wherever you are. But I believe it's always a matter of ratio and the power that each one of those persons yield. So if you have a particularly toxic person that is part of the core maintenance team, if it's someone that has a lot of power and influence on the community, I would really ask you to access if you really want to be closed out. So if you have some jerk that just yells at the void and no one is really paying attention, you can certainly live with that. But someone that is actually in a leadership position, they should not be doing that. It affects deeply the community. And that is the red sign that you say, don't. And I think because in open source, we are pretty, I like to believe that we are pretty friendly, mostly. We are always here to help. If you're thinking about starting on a certain community and start volunteer on a certain place, ask for help. There are so many people on Twitter. Just drop us an email, just drop us a message. Hey, have you heard anything good or bad about community X? We always know someone that knows someone. It's a fact. We talk. There is this whole network. It's an open secret that we know the good things and where to avoid. So if you're in question, ask. We are there to do that. And if you have no one, you can drop me an email later. It's fine. I'm going to answer as fast as I can. This is a person that I respect a lot, and he answered that when I asked about communities. And that's a thing that you have to keep in mind. You are a volunteer. You are literally not being paid to be on that project. So you have to remember, why did you try to join this open source anyway? What was the reason at the very beginning of the talk that said, why do you want to be here? Is it actually fulfilling what you actually wanted to be? You can leave any time for any reason. You just drop a message and say, hey, turns out I can't finish a dizzy ticket, and go. You're a volunteer. When we're part of a community, when people stick around, we're pretty grateful, but it's okay to leave. No one is going to force you, and you should not force yourself to stay if your mental health is in danger in here. And that is the thing that you have to ask. Is that a good project? Is it really making my life better? Do I feel fulfilled on what it actually started? And just like Marie Kondo, if it's not sparking joy anymore, you fold it, you say thank you, and you let it go. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cynthia. We have 1 minute. Does anyone have one very short question?